Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto went to the galaxy he never knew existed. Naruto discovers a crashed starship outside his village and his life is forever changed. Under the unorthodox tutelage of a Sith Lord's spirit, he will learn the technology and history of a larger galaxy that he, and no one else from his planet, ever knew existed. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 13, A Month and Then the War. Standing in the alley right beside a store, Naruto tried to calm his nerves. A week had passed since the second part of the Chunin exam had ended and it had been a very long week for him. He managed to get his promotion to Special Jonin, which didn't actually involve that much as he only had to show mastery over one element and that he had skills above Chunin level. There was no long or involved test for the Special Jonin ranking. He had a choice whether to try for full Jonin or just Special Jonin, and he chose the latter as either one could get him access to the information in the library that he was after and the Special Jonin rank was easier to attain. He also had to deal with Karen for an entire week, which was terrible. It seemed he couldn't go an hour without a complaint about something. She complained about the hideout, where she had to sleep, that she wasn't getting enough sunlight, how bad it was to be stuck inside all of the time, and then came the list of demands. She wanted clothes, shoes, and had specific dietary requirements. He also couldn't just let her continue to use the same pair of clothing that she had. Because of her supposed death, her belongings had been taken by her teammates and sensei back to Kusagakure, so she only had the clothing she was wearing. Unfortunately, he did need her help and acquiesced to these requests. He went out to get her all the things she needed. Of course, the clothes he found weren't good enough and the shoes he found apparently didn't fit properly. It angered him greatly, and to stop the complaining he had foolishly endangered himself and let her leave the hideout so she could buy the items herself. Her glasses had also been damaged during the Chunin exams and needed replacement. This wasn't something he could do. She was currently in the store that he was standing nearby. She was still within his range and he had placed a seal on her tongue to keep her from talking about him or anything related to him, as well as being kidnapped. However, this did not mean that he could trust her not to run away. He was also listening to make sure that she didn't say anything she wasn't supposed to or try to gain the attention of anyone else. Karen was needed for his plans and he couldn't let her run away or bring unwanted attention to himself so close to the completion of his and Plagueis' plans. The only good news he had this week, in relation to her, was her progress with medical ninjutsu. Karen had progressed very far for just a week's worth of training. It made sense as her chakra control was much better than his and she already had a good knowledge of the human body. With her entire time spent learning from the information he had, it wouldn't be long before she could be good enough to alter the corpse. He had a few shadow clones stationed at different areas to make sure that if she tried to run, that she would be caught and not get very far. They had already been to 3 other places to shop and Karen had yet to try and say anything or try to run, but he was not about to let his guard down. His force listening picked up her voice inside the store and he thought she might be talking with an employee, but he realized it was much worse. He clearly recognized the voice she was conversing with. No. 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 Anyone but her. He thought and considered running into the store to retrieve Karen. Thanks for the help, Karen paused for a second as she hadn't actually caught the name of the girl that had been helping her shop for Kunoichi clothing. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself, my name's Tenten, replied the bun-haired girl. I haven't seen you or here before, said Tenten, and Karen froze slightly at the statement. Neither noticed that the lights had started flickering. Well, I'm still in the academy. Karen quickly lied as it would explain her lack of forehead protector. Well, that makes sense. Hopefully we'll see each other again, but I'm pretty busy with my team, Tenten replied. She didn't have many friends that were kunoichi and mostly just her teammates, so it might be nice to talk with someone that seemed to be more concerned with being a kunoichi than anything else. Most of the kunoichi in her class were only concerned over how they looked or boys more than about training. "I'd like that," said Karen, and some of the displays by the window started rattling or vibrating as if they were being shaken by a minor earthquake, but everything else seemed fine and no one really noticed. "Maybe we could meet up again later in the week?" inquired Karen to her new friend. The glass on the window formed cracks. "Sure, how about lunch tomorrow at the restaurant across the street?" asked Tenten, and the window shattered. They both looked over at the now broken window but looked back a moment later. "That seems to be happening a lot recently," Tenten thought. "Tomorrow sounds great, I'll meet you there at noon," said Karen, and some of the clothing near the display window caught on fire. Still standing outside, Naruto had developed a twitch as he tried to rein in his emotions. He couldn't believe that out of all the people Karen could have met while shopping at the few stores they went to, that somehow, she would run in Tenten. "No matter what I do, as long as I'm in the village, she just keeps getting closer to me and my sword," he thought. He was distracted enough while contemplating Tenten's death that he didn't notice Karen approach him until she's standing next to him and staring at him. "Oi, I'm back, we can head back now," said Karen in a dull voice, as she knew that he would chase her down if she tried to run. He has been special Jonin now, and she was still just a genin. He also had those extra powers, and she stood no chance against him. "Fine. Where's the leftover money?" asked Naruto, as he had given her a good amount and more than enough to buy what she needed. I sorta, kinda, spent it all," said Karen while not looking at him. They were walking away from most public areas, but she felt she was safe in terms of any reprisal. Naruto took a deep breath and continued walking. He wasn't going to respond to what she had said and just let it go. As they passed through the less crowded areas of the village, Karen decided to ask a question: "Have you noticed weird things happening in the village for no apparent reason?" "While I was talking to Tenten, the window of the shop." But she stopped talking when several garbage cans mysteriously tipped over in a nearby alley for no apparent reason. Feeling the movement of the unknown energy in the boy beside her, she realized what it was that had been causing it and decided to drop the subject. Hideout behind Hokage faces. "You're not going to lunch with that girl tomorrow," Naruto stated, and Karen frowned. "Why not?" Karen demanded. She didn't have any friends, and despite being a captive, she wanted at least some freedom and not having to be stuck in the rocky prison all the time. "Because I said so," replied Naruto with finality, but Karen wasn't about to give up. "Is it because you have something going on with that Tenten girl?" she commented with a giggle, and she stopped a moment later when she felt the killing intent radiating off of him. "Don't ever say that again," he said seriously, and Karen frowned while trying not to show that she was scared of him. "I can still read your thoughts," came Naruto's voice in her head, and she jumped slightly and then scowled at him. "I don't get it, she seems harmless," stated Karen as she thought about her brief interactions with the bun-haired girl. "She's far from harmless," responded Naruto, and he tried not to touch the seal on his hand that held his sword. "What, is she stalking you or something?" commented Karen, and Naruto responded, "Yes, you could say that she is." A moment of silence passed before Karen spoke again. "Just let me out for lunch, you can't keep me locked up in here forever." "Sure, I can," he said. "Oh, come on. I'll stop bugging you for a few days," said offered, and Naruto contemplated this. Stupid empathy. He thought as he could feel Karen's emotions and feelings on the subject and had trouble getting them out of his head. "I'll think about it. I have to go on patrol in the village," he said, and left the room. She felt him leave a shadow clone to work on something, as he always did when he left the hideout. The clone would check in on her and make sure she didn't try to get away or wasn't trying to subvert his creator's plans in any way. Once she felt him leave the hideout, she smiled at her victory. The ability to read her mind appeared to be a double-edged sword. From trial and error, she found that he couldn't read all of her thoughts and only certain things that she happened to be thinking about or feeling at the time. After several days, she managed to use this to her advantage. While having a very serious demeanor and being in control of his emotions, Naruto still had those emotions, and with the right state of mind, she found that she could influence him because of it. It wasn't that much of an influence, but if she managed to make it seem like it was something that she really needed, then she could get it out of him. It was the main reason why she had been able to go on her shopping trip. Picking up all of her bags, she took them to her room. She didn't have much in the way of items, really just a bed, but it was better than nothing. Her current situation wasn't that great, but she'd rather make the most of it. No one in her hidden village had ever thought she was very useful, and although she had no idea what he had planned, she was definitely getting something out of it. All the texts and information that she had access to was more than she had ever seen in her life. It only kept getting bigger with each trip that Naruto made to the library. With his incredibly high chakra reserves, he had no talent being a chakra sensor or using techniques that required extremely fine chakra control. This meant that she likely wouldn't be replaced anytime soon. It wasn't that much to hold on to or keep herself going, but it was something. She only had an extremely small apartment in Kizugakure, had no family, lived on what little money she received for the missions that her team did, and had no access to anything near the amount of information that Naruto had stockpiled. Her mind had gone through many different what-ifs in the past week, but she still couldn't determine if her life in Kusa was better or worse than her current situation. Next week I'll try to get some furniture to put my clothes in, she thought, and went back to the room with the desk and medical texts in it. Naruto had already created a water basin and put fish in it that she could use for her medical ninjutsu. It was best to keep her progress going. The more useful she was, the less likely he would be to think about getting rid of her or trying to find a replacement. Moving over the tops of the buildings, Naruto went to his duty station in the village. He had a shadow clone go to the library to continue copying down all of the information that it could. So far, no one had said anything about his constant trips to the library or his copying down all the information. He had used persuasion tricks to help him not get noticed by the guards and librarians, but he was still paranoid because of apparently how easy it was to follow him, which had been demonstrated by Danzo and the chakra sensor working for him. Making his way around the village's hot springs area and to the western wall of the village, where he would be on patrol and guard duty in one of the watch towers on the village wall, he noted a figure crouched at the wall of the woman's hot springs. Stopping, he decided to stop the person from peeping. He was early anyway, and could take the time to stop a pervert from peeping on the women's side of the hot springs. He landed a little way away from the giggling man. Staring at the man, he noted that the profile looked familiar. Searching his memory, he determined that the person greatly resembled Jiraiya of the Sannin. He couldn't actually see the face to confirm it, but the clothing and hair appeared to be the man's. However, it could just be any old pervert that dressed funny, and had spiky white hair. Confused on what to do, he took time out to think about the situation. It was possible that one of the Sannin was in front of him. If the man was Jiraiya, then he was completely focused on peeping and not paying any attention to his surroundings at all. I very much doubt one of the Sannin would let their guard down this much, he thought, and started walking to the man. It obviously wasn't Jiraiya, and most likely the pervert just had a strong resemblance to the man. Naruto walked up the man and decided to clear his throat and get the man's attention, letting him know that he had been caught. He wanted to use one of techniques on the man but refrained. "Quiet down, brat, I'm trying to get some research done here," stated the man while jotting a few things down on a notepad, and his head turned just enough that Naruto could see half of his face. It was definitely Jiraiya of the Sannin. Naruto was again confused at what he should do. According to his master, Orochimaru was too much for him to handle, and Jiraiya was likely also on that level, but here the man was in front of him with his guard down while peeping on the woman's hot springs. The situation didn't make sense. A man of that level should not be so easily distracted and vulnerable. He was a veteran ninja, legendary in status, and had been through wars and countless battles. Yet crouched in front of him was that same man, giggling while looking through a small peephole, and writing down notes as well as small sketches. Nearly a minute went by as Naruto stood several feet behind the man and thought about his next move. It was likely that as soon as he made a movement or showed any sign of aggression, that the Sannin would move to counter almost instantly and he wouldn't stand a chance against the man. I could just use force grip and then use drain knowledge, but what if he manages to get away somehow? He questioned and thought perhaps it wouldn't work. The moment I try something is the moment he'll counter or substitute himself with a log. With experience like his, he might even be 1 or 2 steps ahead and already be suspected me of plotting something. He thought and struggled with indecision. Even with his advantages and a surprise attack with the force, he might not be able to defeat the man in front of him. It could all have just been an act and Jiraiya could be toying with him. Look buddy, if you're waiting for your turn, it's gonna be a long wait. You might as well find another peephole, said Jiraiya, and he waved Naruto off dismissively. Naruto's stern face turned into a scowl at the statement. He didn't like being shrugged or waved off as nothing or as being insignificant in the eyes of someone else. The same thing happened with Orochimaru and he wasn't taken seriously at all by the man. The only reason he hadn't attacked Orochimaru was because of his master's orders. Fuck it, he thought. His master never told him not to attack Jiraiya, only Orochimaru, and he wasn't going to have another powerful ninja shrug him off. Using force grip on the man, he chopped the man in the back of the man's neck. The hit was delivered to the exact area that would cause instant unconsciousness. Jiraiya didn't move at all under the force grip, and when Naruto released the technique the pervert fell over, seemingly unconscious. Naruto waited a good minute for something to happen. He expected the body to go up in smoke or the attack to fail and the man to get back up. He checked for genjutsu, but it didn't seem like he was being influenced by one. After the minute mark had elapsed, he came to the conclusion that nothing else was going to happen. One of the legendary Sannin was at his feet and had been knocked out while peeping on the woman's hot springs. There was no battle and it was one of the easiest fights he ever had, or likely would ever have. I wonder if Master Playguys would believe me if I told him what happened. I wonder if any ninja would believe me for that matter. Naruto questioned. Looking around he noted that the area was still devoid of people. They were at the back of the hot springs and no one really came this way as the entrance was on the other side. Despite the entire situation still seeming ludicrous at best, he grabbed one of Jiraiya's legs and dragged the man near the open hot springs water that was flowing nearby. Using the force and the hidden mist technique, he created a cocoon of steam around him and the body. Creating a few shadow clones, they left the steam area and went to hide in a few nearby trees. If anyone came by, he would be alerted to their presence through his connection to the shadow clones. He did this because while he used the drain knowledge technique, he had difficulty focusing on his surroundings. His shadow clones would keep anyone from finding out what he was doing. Jiraiya never got a good look at him, but just in case the man could sense chakra, he would have to make sure that he didn't go near the man again and wasn't late for his duty shift, so he created another clone to report for duty at the wall. Crouching down, he made sure that Jiraiya was definitely out cold and would be for a while. He hadn't actually thought of it before as he was still somewhat in shock over the situation. Putting his hand on the man's head, he started looking through the memories in search of techniques and anything useful. He spent a minute pushing past all of the peeping, research, and book writing before he got something interesting that was rather recent. The name Akatsuki was in the man's mind. He had first heard the group from Kabuto's mind and perhaps now he would find out a little bit more. Looking for any information he found that Orochimaru was a part of the group, which he already knew, but he did find further information about what they were interested in. From what Jiraiya had found out, the group was very interested in Bijou, specifically the Jinchuriki. Naruto looked deeper but didn't manage to find out what exactly it is that they wanted with Jinchuriki. This was of interest to him and he would have to talk with Playguys about it later. Delving to other memories, he started finding out about all the techniques that Jiraiya knew and sifted through the ones he already had to find one that were new to him. He did find a couple unique fire jutsu, a hair extending jutsu, information on Fuinjutsu, and a few other unique techniques, but not the treasure trove he was looking for and that his master had gotten from Kakashi. Most of the jutsu Jiraiya knew were ones that he had already found in the library. It was disappointing but unavoidable. Kakashi had so many unique jutsu because he had copied them with his Sharingan, and Jiraiya only knew the jutsu that he had mastered himself. Furthering his search, he found information on the toad summons which wasn't that helpful, but one thing did stand out. It was called natural energy and was gathered to form sage chakra and then to use senjutsu. That was extremely interesting, and the more he found out about it from the man's memories, the more he knew that his master would be very pleased. Whatever the energy was, it seemed to differ from chakra and the force. He was now very interested in it and its usage, as it might be something he could eventually learn. Putting that information aside after he got all he could, he continued. Images of the yondaime came to the surface and he looked through them with some interest. There was little about the yondaime's Hiraishin jutsu, as Jiraiya had never seen the exact workings of it, and only the final jutsu and a brief explanation on what it did. Those memories were interesting but not helpful at all. It wasn't until he came across something else that he stopped for a moment. It was buried rather deeply, but he was able to get at it. Jiraiya was sitting in a house talking with the yondaime, and a pregnant woman walked in. He stopped for a moment as he looked at the memory. He'd never heard about the yondaime having a wife, and by the time he refocused on the memory, the woman was speaking. She said that the baby would be called Naruto. The technique ended at that moment, as Naruto had lost all control over his emotions and the force he was channeling. He stood still and stared down at the ground for quite some time. His mind finally started working again, and he pieced together what he knew and searched his feelings. He wondered if the information he always sought as a child had always been so easy to figure out, or was he just not willing to realize that his father was the yondaime? The knowledge made him feel empty inside, both because he had never realized it and because no one had ever told him or gave him any indication of who they were. He had questions, so many questions, and wanted answers. It wasn't hard to get those answers, though, as they seemed to slip into place. People knew who his parents were, they just didn't tell him. More than just Jiraiya knew. The Sandaime must have known, and perhaps even the Ninja Council. They knew, and they chose not to tell him. They chose to let him wonder and keep him ignorant of it. They chose to lie to him. Where was his mother, and who was she? Why had his father sealed the Kyuubi into him? Why did the Sandaime let the villagers treat him so horribly? Why did everyone keep so many important things from him? Those were the questions that he wanted answers to. The emptiness was replaced by a sick feeling, and soon all he felt was anger. The rage boiled inside of him and came to the surface. He stood and kept his head down while his canine teeth lengthened and his fingernails turned to claws. His hair got longer and became wilder. His whiskers darkened and widened, and his eyes turned from blue to orange, and the pupil became a slit. He wasn't really thinking or feeling anything but the rage inside of him. The questions and other thoughts were replaced with a blinding rage. Red chakra began to bubble on the surface of his body, and the stone beneath him started cracking. His hands curled into fists, and blood started dripping from where his claws pierced his own palms. Instead of dropping to the ground, the blood floated upward from the dark side of the force he was channeling. Not a moment later, several shadow clones tried to dogpile him. They knew what was happening and tried to stop him from using any of the Kyuubi's chakra, as it could alert the entire village. The real Naruto didn't care, though, and wasn't even thinking about such things. He easily killed the shadow clones and then focused on the man still unconscious at his feet. Barely thinking straight with the bloodlust and hatred that he was being consumed by, and wanting nothing more than to kill everything that had wronged him, he decided he would kill the man. Then he would go after the Sandaime and the council and kill anyone that got in his way. These people had taken things from him and kept everything from him that was important. Forming a dark ball of energy in his hand, he sneered at the unconscious Jiraiya beneath him. Back at the hideout. The destruction of the shadow clones not only caused an inflow of information into the creator, but also the remaining shadow clones that Naruto had created. The clone in the hideout immediately stopped what it was doing and ran to the wall that had several fuinjutsu scrolls. The particular scroll it grabbed was one that was supposed to be used when the village was attacked, but it would now serve a different purpose. With the scroll in hand, it ran to one of the larger rooms in the hideout that was empty and primarily used for training. Unrolling the already created scroll, the clone added chakra to it. At the same moment at the village wall, the clone's eyes widened and it started thinking about what it needed to do and what the situation was. He wasn't sure what would happen, but it was best to stay where it was. The creator likely wouldn't be coming to relieve it from duty, and it was also possible that Anbu would be coming to find and subdue him if anyone felt the release of the Kyuubi's chakra. He only hoped that the creator would stop channeling the Kyuubi's chakra before the entire village felt it and ninja came after him. At the same moment at the library. Shit, thought the clone in the library, and it looked around for anyone watching. This part of the library was mostly deserted, but it got up and went to an area where no one could see. Putting its hand into the ram seal, it created a hinge around itself. It was merely a contingency in case something happened because of the creator's usage of the Kyuubi's chakra. The entire plan could be in danger, and if anyone had felt the Kyuubi's chakra being used, then they would immediately start searching for him. The clone emerged looking like a random jonin and sat back down at the table to finish what it was doing. If it needed to, it could use an earth jutsu and move through the walls of the mountain and get back to the hideout. Back at the hideout. A plume of smoke erupted above the scroll and the clone felt the creator be summoned back to the hideout. It could feel the powerful chakra radiating off its creator, but it wasn't sure what to do. Putting a good amount of distance between them, it tried to ensure that it wouldn't be destroyed like the other clones had been at the hot springs. Before the smoke had cleared, an explosion occurred where the real Naruto was standing and sent debris and dust around the room. The smoke and dust finally cleared to reveal a confused and very primal-looking Naruto. The foul chakra was still radiating off him, but it had stopped emanating off of his body, and he was merely channeling it now. He searched around for the person he had been trying to kill and was confused where he was. The man he had been trying to kill was gone and the area was different. The shadow clone was still hiding and wasn't going to let itself be seen, but it had to do something. Going through a few hand seals and touching the floor, the solid rock of the training area turned into a muddy swamp and the real Naruto started sinking in it. Unable to get out of the mud, the real Naruto started struggling, which only caused him to sink faster. The clone stayed where it was and stopped the technique when its creator had sunk enough into the floor. The floor hardened and the real Naruto was left stuck. His breathing came in deep breaths as he tried to get out of the now solid floor that he was stuck up to his waist in. The floor started to crack, but he eventually stopped trying. The disappearance of the man he was trying to kill caused a good portion of the anger and bloodlust that was causing his rampage to subside. He was able to come back to his senses enough to start trying to push back the extra emotions and the chakra that was being forced upon him. With the inclusion of the floor making him sink, he perceived danger and his mind started focusing on where he was and what he was doing. As he finally came to his sense and could focus on what was happening, he finally realized where he was. With great effort, the remaining Kyuubi chakra was suppressed and pushed back into the seal. His eyes, fingernails, and other changes to his body went back to normal. Naruto was left partially trapped in the floor and completely confused as to what had just happened. His body was shaking slightly, he was sweating, his breathing was ragged, and his mind was a jumble of images and feelings that were hard to figure out. What the hell happened? He wondered and tried to piece together everything. He could clearly remember certain parts, like finding and subduing Jiraiya, and then using the drain knowledge technique on the man, but after that thing got hazy and the memories were fragmented. He was safe inside his hideout and saw his clone emerge from hiding. He could also feel Karen watching from the entryway of the training area. Closing his eyes, he thought back to what had happened. I started searching through Jiraiya's mind. He remembered and continued to search his memories. Everything he found in the man's mind started coming back to him. The techniques, the fuinjutsu, Akatsuki, the sage chakra, and then he came up what had set him off. The information he found had been so sudden and unexpected that there was no way he could prepare himself from him, and he lost all control of himself. He still felt anger at what he had found out, but he was able to control his feelings this time. He thought back to the images of his mother and found the single image he had of her in his mind very calming. Getting his breathing back to normal, he went through several hand seals and got himself out of the floor. He could think back and deal with the discovered information later. Now it was time to think about damage control. "Do you have any idea how bad the situation is?" he asked his clone, and the clone simply shook its head no. "Damn it," Naruto thought, as he could have potentially ruined the entire plan. The Sandaime and multiple ANBU reached the location of the disturbance and found an odd sight. Jiraiya was unconscious on the ground, and there appeared to be damage to the stone surface near him. His first thought was that Jiraiya had fell from some height and was knocked out, but he quickly pushed that aside as not being true, despite how clumsy he knew his student could be. There was no way for someone to fall from anything in the area and make that kind of damage to the stone. It was either caused by a jutsu or something else. He had been working on paperwork when he clearly felt the chakra of the kyuubi being used, or what he thought was the kyuubi. It felt familiar to the chakra from over a decade previously, but it also felt different. Not a moment later, he called his ANBU and rushed to the area he felt it. Other people probably felt it too, and he wanted to determine the situation before causing any panic in the village. From the duty roster, Naruto was supposed to be at the village wall on guard duty for next couple of weeks. He was heading one of the watch towers along the wall as his first assignment under the rank of Special Jonin. Normally he would have gotten a mission outside the village, but the Chunin exams finals were approaching, and that meant that Konoha ninja were mostly pulled back to the village to help plan the event and get everything prepared. The disturbance came from the hot springs, which he did find odd, but regardless of the location he rushed as fast as he could from the Hokage Tower. He still had trouble determining if it came from the kyuubi or not. The chakra source had disappeared only seconds after he felt it, and the area didn't have much residual chakra left in it. Getting back to task at hand, he ordered one ANBU to take a look at Jiraiya, then ordered the rest to scout the area and to find Uzumaki Naruto. No one was around, and the only people that were in the area were the ones in the hot springs building, but they likely wouldn't be of any help. He had to wonder just what Jiraiya was doing here. Well, he didn't have to wonder what his student was doing at the hot springs with a notepad, but he did wonder what the man was doing in the village. It had been years since Jiraiya had made any visit to Konoha. Is it possible that Jiraiya was involved? He questioned, but would have to wait for any answers. He looked to the ANBU for an update, and the man stated, "He's just unconscious. I've got some smelling salts in my pack." And the ninja went pull out the item from one of his ninja pouches. "Hopefully I'll get some answers out of him about what's going on," he thought as the salts were put under Jiraiya's nose. Sitting in his home, Danzo glanced out the open window with his Sharingan revealed. He felt the disturbance, and from what little chakra went into the air, as well as what he could tell with his own sensing ability, he determined that it was the kyuubi's chakra. His Sharingan recognized the kyuubi's chakra, but something about it felt strange and very different from what he remembered. He couldn't go to the disturbance and also couldn't send any of his men to investigate, so he rebandaged his eye and headed for the Hokage Tower. There would undoubtedly be a meeting concerning what was happening, and he was very interested in finding out what was going on. If something happened to the seal or the container was somehow channeling or being influenced by the kyuubi, it could provide an opportunity for him. Sitting in a meditative stance in the hideout, the real Naruto started thinking of what he should do. He was safe while in his hideout, and if he left, he might be picked up by the ANBU and taken to the Hokage. It all depended on how much of the kyuubi's chakra he had released and who felt it. Unfortunately, he had no idea how much had been released. It was possible that no one had felt it, or that the entire village felt had, and anywhere in between was also a possibility. The best thing he could do was sit and wait. His shadow clone had likely made it to the village wall before his duty shift started, and so he had a weak alibi. As long as no one discovered that it was a clone and not the real person that showed up for duty, he might be able to escape being arrested or detained. The shadow clones he created did have the seal on them, and it was visible when channeling chakra to his stomach, and the clone at the wall was created before he used the Kyuubi's chakra. So it was possible that the clone could prove his innocence. However, this still left the fact that people may have felt the Kyuubi's chakra. If several people had felt and recognized it, then it would create a situation that he couldn't completely explain or deal with. For now, he would just have to wait. The worst possible scenario was that the village found out he was up to something and he stayed in his hideout until the Chunin exam finals without using the arrangement he had been working on. The plan for the Genin corpse relied on the fact that he was still a Konoha ninja and other certain circumstances. It wouldn't work for any other plan. Unless he managed to find a new body to use, he would likely be labeled as a missing nin. While it wasn't that big of a problem, it had the potential to cause problems later on and ruin his master plans. Coming out of his meditation, he said to the person watching, "Get back to your training, Karen." The girl froze and then frowned from behind the wall where she was hiding. Her chakra had been completely suppressed, and yet he had still sensed her. She was incredibly curious as to what was happening and what the foul chakra was that she felt. She had been scared for her life earlier, but now it seemed that whatever happened was over. From her sensing ability, she knew that the chakra came from within him and had been there since before they first met in the forest. Something had changed though, and now it seemed that a minuscule amount of that chakra was leaking out into his body at a regular rate. This concerned her, and she would look for any changes later on to see if the new chakra was somehow influencing him. She thought about telling him but was unsure about what to do. Despite what was going on, she felt that it was best to go back and work on her medical ninjutsu. Jiraiya's explanation of what happened only served to further confuse him. Someone had knocked out Jiraiya and then moved his body. His student never got a look at his attacker, and it was just completely embarrassing that someone he trained could be caught so unaware while researching at the women's hot springs. He almost wished Jiraiya hadn't remembered anything at all and had been only passing through the area. It was just shameful to have his student confess with the ANBU still in the area that he had been taken completely by surprise while peeping at the women's bath. The only problem now was to put together how Naruto was involved with all of this. Did he attack Jiraiya, and why was the Kyuubi's chakra released? He questioned, but they would remain unanswered until the boy was found. Picking up the movement of his ANBU, he turned to see an ANBU captain and two of his subordinates quickly appear near him. "Sandaime-sama, we have found Uzumaki Naruto and he is being escorted to the tower," reported the captain in the white cloak, while his two black-cloaked subordinates stayed silent. "Where was he and what is his condition?" demanded the Sandaime, and ANBU was quick to respond, "We found him at his post at the eastern-western watchtower." From witnesses of the other ninja stationed in the tower, he reported early for duty and has been there since. The Sandaime developed a contemplative look as he stared off towards the protective wall that circled the village. If Naruto reported to his duty station early, then how could he have also released the Kyuubi's chakra in the hot springs area of the village? There is quite some distance between them, he noted. The Western Guard/Watchtower was one of several stations along the top of the village wall. If there were witnesses that said Naruto arrived early to his station, then it made him wonder how Naruto could have been in two places at once. Another matter that he hadn't considered until that very moment also occurred to him. In the 12 years that Naruto had been alive and the 4 years since he had become a ninja, no one had ever told him that he carried the Kyuubi sealed inside of him. This is going to be a delicate matter, the Sandaime thought and sighed. He waved off the ANBU and headed back to the Hokage Tower with Jiraiya following. By the time the Sandaime had gotten back to the Hokage Tower, the village elders as well as a few of the clan heads were already there, while the rest were presumably on the way. Yamanaka Inoichi was a chakra sensor and had easily detected the large disturbance near the hot springs and rushed to the Hokage Tower for orders. The head ANBU and the Jonin commander in the village had been notified as well. The Sandaime wanted to keep anyone else from finding out about what had happened, but it seemed that the private meeting he wanted to have with Naruto would have to wait. Going to the council meeting room, the Sandaime briefed the other members once they had arrived and Jiraiya sat in on the meeting. The Inuzuka dogs had alerted the entire clan that something was wrong, much in the same way the Aburame's Kikachu alerted them. A Kimichi clan head was alerted by his friends, both have positions on the council. The Hyuga clan head was alerted by other members of his clan who were chakra sensors. When the members finally assembled, the Sandaime brought them up to speed with what was going on and everything that he knew up to that point. Sitting on a bench down the hall from the meeting room, Naruto sat silently as he contemplated what to do. His clone was surrounded by 4 ANBU members, but he wasn't concerned with them. Currently, his real body was still sitting in the hideout and meditating, but through his connection with his clone, he had possessed it. He could speak and act through the clone while remaining safe no matter what decision was made. It was not something he had performed under such circumstances before, as he had just toyed around with the technique, but now it was getting a trial run. With the technique, he could actually channel the force through his clone, despite the individual clone not being able to use the force. It was something to do with the possession or whatever it was that he was doing that allowed him to use the clone as if he was really there. His force powers, however, were diminished from those he possessed in his real boy. In a way, it was slightly similar to what his master was doing with Gata's body. He had yet to try and take control of multiple clones, but now that he finally realized how useful the technique was, he would have to find time to practice with it. Using his force listening ability, he could hear what was going on in the meeting room and what was being said. As the meeting progressed, he found out everything that they knew and started quickly thinking up ways to keep himself from being caught. He still had at least a week's worth of work left to do in the library, and getting caught would only make things harder. Thinking through the possible choices, he tried to find the best choice that would not get him arrested, or at least not get his clone arrested. Being put under heavy surveillance was a better alternative to putting the village on lockdown while everyone systematically searched for him once his clone dispelled. Even with all the precautions he had taken with the hideout, it was still possible that someone could find it if they were looking. He was broken from his thoughts when the door to the council meeting room was opened and he was told to enter. All eyes were on him as he walked into the room and sat down at the chair that was indicated. Naruto sat down in a seat across from all the clan heads at a wooden oval table. The room looked like every other room in the Hokage Tower except it had no windows. He glanced around the table and took in all the faces. His face was neutral and he tried his best to make himself come off as being confused more than nervous. He also tried not to look at Jiraiya, who was leaning against one of the walls. He didn't want to give away any indication that he recognized the man. Controlling his emotions was proving to be extremely difficult though, as he had to keep his anger in check despite what he was feeling towards many of the members of the room. Most of them had in some way conspired to keep his identity and parents from him for as long as possible. Danzo specifically knew things about him that he didn't want anyone else to find out about. They made him an orphan with no ancestry that the Yondaime had chosen as a sacrifice, but he was so much more. The people before him were also content with leaving him with nothing about his parents or what he held sealed inside of him. Being lied to was something he hated, but not as much as being shrugged off or considered not important. In one way or another, the occupants of the seats at the table had been doing one or both of those things to him all his life. He wanted nothing more than to attack them, but this was a clone body, and even if he had the element of surprise, with everyone else in the room, and considering their skills, he stood no chance at following through with any of the thoughts he was burying in his head. He would have to let it go for now, but perhaps later on he would get revenge. The room remained silent as the doors were shut and the ANBU guarding him remained and stood behind him, looming over and ready to strike. They were ready to kill him should he make any wrong move, but he really couldn't care. This wasn't his body, and no matter the outcome of the meeting, he would make sure he got away and finished his master's plans. The first person to speak in the room was the Sandaime. "We've called you here to answer a few questions for us concerning your day. There has been an unexplained disturbance within the village and we're questioning everyone that may have been involved directly or indirectly. Could you explain to us your day so far, from the beginning?" The Sandaime asked in a calm tone, but Naruto knew he was fishing for answers and knew little of what really happened. None of the people before him had any idea what had really happened less than an hour ago, and he intended to keep them in the dark as much or as long as possible. Even if they suspected him of something, it was better than ruining the final parts of the plan and not getting the information from the library. I woke up at around 7, got dressed in my uniform, and ate breakfast. Then I went to my assigned station of one of the Western Watch Towers. Shortly afterward, the ANBU came to bring me here. Stated Naruto, and he waited to see what they would ask next. There was little change in the council members. A few were scrutinizing him for lies, but he had been trained by his master to lie in front of anyone. He had even been trained to lie and escape scrutiny from analyzing machines or even Jedi. The members of the council found nothing wrong with the statement, so the Sandaime pressed on. Did anything out of the ordinary happen on your way to your duty station or at any point before the ANBU came to get you? Questioned the Sandaime a little more seriously. I went straight to my post. I didn't stop to look at anything along the way. Stated Naruto. The members of the council stared at him and he merely stared back. A silence passed before Naruto broke it. If you don't believe me, couldn't you just have a Yamanaka do a mind walk or something? He said and watched as he got several reactions. He inwardly smiled as he knew that a mind walk on a Jinchuriki had never been done and the council wouldn't consider it. No one had ever told him about the Kyuubi and now he could use it against them. Waiting for a response, he got one from the Sandaime. I don't think that will be necessary. Did something happen that I should know about? Questioned Naruto in as innocent a voice as he could and he waited for an answer. He eventually got one from the Sandaime. No, that will be all. Getting up, the ANBU opened the doors and let him leave while following him. The room was silent as everyone took in everything that was said. The Sandaime sighed, and it was Shikaku that spoke first. I think he did something and is guilty, but I can't prove anything. What exactly it was that he did? Stated Shikaku as he thought through as many possibilities as he could. I don't really know what he would be hiding. While releasing some of the Kyuubi's chakra is of great concern, it isn't exactly a crime. We still have no idea why or how he did it. We also don't know how Jiraiya was involved with all of this. Stated Aburame Shibi, and with that he looked over to the white-haired man who had a serious look on his face. Do you think it's possible that he knows about the seal and the Kyuubi? Said Inoichi as he put out the question to the room. None of the council members answered the question. They all thought through the possibilities. You haven't told him about the seal and the Kyuubi. Jiraiya blurted out at Sandaime. The Sandaime sighed again. Nothing was making any sense. Why did Naruto attack Jiraiya or release some of the Kyuubi's chakra? He wondered and then thought, what else has he been keeping from me? He wanted to wait as long as possible to tell Naruto about the Kyuubi. Had Naruto somehow found out and was experimenting with the seal? The question bothered him greatly and he knew he would have to tell Naruto about the seal and get Jiraiya to examine it and see if there is anything wrong. The conversation between the council members continued for several more minutes. The entire time Danzo was sitting quietly and taking in everything that he had heard. He was making his own conclusions. Naruto sat outside with the ANBU escort close by and waited for the meeting to finish. He had a good idea what was going to happen next from the conversion going on in the room. They believed he was lying and then he would be taken to the Sandaime's office where the Kyuubi would be explained to him and the seal examined, likely by Jiraiya. Then they would determine what was going on and that he had been responsible for the release of chakra. From their minds, he could tell that most of the members on the council had not felt the release of chakra themselves and could not be sure it even came from the Kyuubi, but they were inclined to believe that it was. The one thing that they hadn't counted on was that he still had something up his sleeve. He had managed to learn quite a bit from Jiraiya's memories about the seal that had been placed on him and could use his current situation to further confound the council. The plan for leaving the village wasn't foolproof and any number of problems could occur, such as what he was currently dealing with. However, even if the plan to leave the village failed, by the time someone realized what had happened, he would be long gone and with no trail to follow. That was the most important part of the plan, that he didn't leave any trail for anyone to follow. Even if he was discovered to be alive, no one would have any idea where to look for him. Snow Country was well over 100 miles from Konoha and across the sea. Once he made it there, who would think to look for him on that island? The only thing he needed to do was make sure that he was on the wall when the battle started. Everything else would fall into place after. This meant that he would have to make sure that he didn't get arrested and could still be at his posting. Even if he was under ANBU watch, he could still work with that. To make sure this happened, he would need to have a discussion with the Hokage and give a good enough performance that they might believe that he didn't know about the Kyuubi beforehand. Unfortunately, that meant having a heartfelt discussion with the Sandaime, which was something he dreaded. Sandaime's office. With the discussion over, Jiraiya started examining the seal on his stomach. He had played ignorant of the seal as well as he could and knew that both men still had their doubts about him. Fortunately, what Jiraiya was about to find would help him greatly. With the release of the Kyuubi's chakra, the seal on his stomach would have loosened or cracked slightly and allowed him some access to the Kyuubi's chakra. Apparently, the Yondaime wanted him to be able to learn to use the Kyuubi's chakra at some point, or that was what Jiraiya thought. Looking at the seal, it should show that it has been loosened, but only those that know what they are looking for can see it. What Jiraiya and the Sandaime didn't know was that this wasn't his real body. It was his shadow clone, and the clone was created before he used the Kyuubi's chakra. This meant that the seal on the clone's body was still perfectly intact and showed no signs of loosening or any kind of damage. It was still perfect as the day it was created. The real seal on his real body would show these signs, but the clone's did not. Jiraiya stared at the seal once again and tried to find any evidence that the boy in front of him had been using the Kyuubi's chakra. From what he could tell, the seal was still fine and the Kyuubi completely locked away. This doesn't make any sense. Sensei swears he felt the Kyuubi, but the seal's completely intact. Jiraiya thought and questioned whether it was the Kyuubi's chakra that had been felt. Someone had managed to sneak up and get the drop on him, at least that was how he saw it. He was perfectly fine though, aside from a headache, and the Kyuubi's chakra, or at least what some people thought was its chakra, had been released inside the village. If the seal was intact, then how could the boy in front of him, who was never told about the Kyuubi, release some of its chakra? He had no answer for this. Once the seal was loosened, it could only be tightened back up by the key. The key! He thought, and he glanced at the boy quickly. His mind went through many different theories and suspicions, but ultimately, he cast them aside. It wouldn't have been possible for the boy to have gotten access to the key that went with the seal. It was attached to a toad summons which was currently inside of him, and the boy did not sign the toad contract or even know about the key in the first place. He would definitely check once the boy left, but he was sure the key was still safe. Then that leaves no explanation for the release of chakra and someone knocking me out. He thought and put the boy's shirt back down. The seal was fine and showed no evidence of weakening or any sign that the Kyuubi's chakra had ever passed into the boy's body. The situation they were left with provided more questions than answers. Putting back on his Jonin vest, Naruto thought about what he had just learned. The key to his seal was apparently with Jiraiya, and he had no way to access to it at all. It was also attached to a summoning animal. He hadn't found this out during his search through the man's mind, but he had been prematurely stopped by what he had found. If I had known that before and hadn't lost my control, I could have had the key or at least tried to get it. He thought as he left the office and went back to his apartment. There didn't seem to be the opportunity for another chance to get it, and he couldn't very well attack the man again. Jiraiya wouldn't be so careless again and would be on his guard. Especially not with my new ANBU escort that will likely be following me around for days if not weeks. He thought as he barely managed to feel with his diminished force powers the life signs of a squad of ANBU that were following him. He needed to get back to his apartment and switch with a fresh clone. While he was technically off the hook, he decided not to leave the hideout again until the Chunin exam finals. Anything he needed, he could send out clones for. Walking out of the Hokage Tower, Danzo headed for his home. The Sandaime had come back and told the council about the seal being completely intact. It was a surprise as he hadn't counted on the container being so resourceful and covering his tracks. He knew more about what was going on than anyone else in the council and was forming conclusions about what had happened before they brought the boy in to question him. He also wasn't willing to share his thoughts with any of the council members. With the boy's ability to read minds, it was obvious to him that Jiraiya's mind had been read in some way and information accessed. It was rather ridiculous that a ninja deemed as legendary could be caught so off guard and unaware, but he tried to put that out of his mind and focus on the more important things. The only aspect of the situation he was still working out was the release of the Kyuubi's chakra. The seal he couldn't be sure about because he had never been able to see the complete sealing method used, but he wondered why the boy had done it. Was he testing something and it went wrong, or did he just completely lose control over his emotions? He wondered. With the ability to read minds, he knew that the answer was in Jiraiya's mind. Something there had led the boy to accidentally release or to try and access some of the Kyuubi's chakra. His mind searched for the possible answers to that question. What would set off such a calm and calculating person that seemed to have excellent control over their emotions? This was the question he was trying to answer. The boy gave nothing away during the meeting, showed no sign of lying, and while many council members suspected something, they couldn't prove anything. They couldn't prove that the boy was associated with the release of chakra or attacking Jiraiya. The Sandaime's view was not to detain anyone unless there was proof of guilt, which in his opinion was a foolish method. The thought eventually came to him when he went through all of the things that Jiraiya might know that would affect the container. The answer was the boy's parents. So, he likely knows who his parents are. Mused Danzo. He wasn't sure if knowing that information was good or bad, but it didn't bode well for the village. He knew he would have to think on this information and what actions to take concerning it. Chapter 14, Leaving. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at the hot springs. Naruto's clones took care of all of his duties and other needs while he stayed in the hideout. His clones performing his duties were being followed and monitored by ANBU 24 hours a day. He knew this because Karen had sensed them. It wasn't that difficult to constantly switch out the clone when it got low on chakra, but there was always the chance that something could happen and one of his clones would get dispelled. He was lucky that he was being kept in the village and on guard duty, so the clones were in no danger of being dispelled. Getting the information from the library was done at night now. He would send a clone that would use an earth jutsu to move through the rock of the Hokage mountain and enter the library when it was closed. He learned enough about the security measures and the patrols to not get caught, but couldn't send more than one clone without the risk of getting noticed. Currently he was focusing on getting everything ready for leaving the hideout. He was removing and sealing all of the scrolls and information that he had into 2 large scrolls that he would seal on his body. He planned to leave everything else how it was in the hideout, except for the Sith runes, so he had the hideout to use later on. Karen had just finished enough of her training to perform the necessary changes to the corpse in order to make the face look like him. While Karen was doing that, he would be placing the seal on the corpse. They would also have to modify his hospital records, which would have to be stolen from the hospital and altered before the Chunin exam finals. With these changes to the body and what he had planned for his death, he would likely fool the entire village into thinking that he was dead. There would likely still be people that would suspect him of something, such as Danzo, but even if the corpse was discovered as not being his, he would be long gone by that time. Getting out the scroll with the body, he would have Karen start working on it later that day. However, there was something he had to do first. He had ANBU, Jiraiya, the Sandaime and his viewing orb, and even a member of Danzo's root ANBU tailing him nearly all the time. Unfortunately, he needed to get supplies as well as do things within the village. The protection of the hideout stopped the viewing orb from finding his real body, but he had a feeling that the Hokage was watching in on his shadow clone from time to time. This was a problem because his clones probably couldn't escape the notice of everyone that was after him, which meant that he couldn't use them effectively to finish the plan in the next week. With the number of methods and sensors that were monitoring him, he had to be more careful than ever. He was working on something to help him escape chakra sensor detection, but it was still a work in progress and he could only delegate the work to a clone while he dealt with the many other problems that he had been experiencing. The only thing that he had going for himself was that none of the people that were after him had ever seen, met, or knew anything about Karen. She could move through the village without question. Should she be caught, he could easily falsify anything that they needed to make her appear to be a current academy student and even a member of the village. He could place fake records of her in the archives, put the same files inside the Ninja Academy file room, and he could always persuade a Chunin teacher to acknowledge the fact that Karen was his student. This could all be done extremely quickly because of the closeness of the academy and the archives to his hideout. He would only need to send a clone using a rock jutsu to get to these locations. This plan seemed feasible to him and he intended to implement it. In preparation and as a test, he had let Karen go to lunch with Tenten 2 weeks ago. The decision was foolish, but he needed to test her loyalty and determine if she could be trusted to act semi-independently inside the village and perform the needed tasks. Waiting for her to return to the meeting place he had designated, which was the main entrance to the hideout at the top of the Hokage monument, she had returned without incident and told him that she would be meeting Tenten for lunch again in a couple of days. He let the lunch meetings go because he needed Karen to help him with much more than he originally planned. Letting her have some freedom would give him leverage to get her to go on a mission for him and work on the corpse. It was a compromise and done to get her to cooperate. Forcing her to do things may only go so far before she tried to subvert his plans. He had talked with his master the previous week but had mentioned nothing about the events that had happened at the hot springs. Right before the transmission, he had a foreboding feeling through the force concerning what he was going to talk about with his master. He wasn't sure where it came from, but it was enough to worry him and rethink what he had been going to inform Playguys about. He pushed the memories and information as deep as he could before contacting his master and giving Playguys an update of his progress. He informed him that things were still proceeding, but he was having trouble because Jiraiya had showed up in the village and Danzo was getting more suspicious. He also mentioned nothing about the Kyuubi, his parents, or using the drain knowledge technique on Jiraiya. He still wasn't sure his master would even believe the story of knocking the legendary ninja out while the man was peeping on the woman's hot springs. Even he himself still had trouble believing it. Currently, he was walking to the room that Karen was practicing medical ninjutsu in. He watched what she was doing for a few moments before he said anything. Karen was just finishing up an exercise with one of the fish he provided and would move on to more advanced training soon. This would be enough for his purposes, and he watched as she healed a fish that he had purposefully injured. Medicine needed real training on real injuries in order to become better, and he couldn't let her go to the hospital or get any experience on real people, except for himself, but he wasn't about to let her use any medical ninjutsu on him. It wasn't that he didn't think her skill was good enough, but that he still didn't trust her completely nor really trust anyone to heal him besides the medical droid and Bacta tank on the ship. Once Karen finished, he spoke, "Since you've completed the exercise, I have something else for you to do." Karen looked up a little startled as she was so focused on the task that she didn't feel him enter the room or standing near her. "What kind of exercise is it?" she asked and was eager to learn anything he could offer. "It won't be an exercise per se. You will be going out into the village and procuring something for me," stated Naruto, and he felt and watched for her reaction. Her eyes widened at what he said and she thought about what it could be. It was good that he was willing to trust her more and give her a bigger role in whatever he was planning. She was very curious what his plans actually were, as it had never been explained to her, and succeeding in some kind of mission would only put her on his good side. "So, what is it?" she questioned, and he proceeded to tell her about the short mission. Karen absorbed the information he was telling her about breaking into the hospital and procuring his medical records. He pulled out plans for the building that were taken from the archives as well as a village map and made sure she knew where she was going. She watched as he pulled out what looked like a fuinjutsu brush and then formed a hand seal she had come to recognize as the one that created his clones. The clone stood next to him as the smoke cleared, and then it performed the henge and turned itself into a small metal pyramid-like object. She watched in curiosity as she wondered what he would do, and then he said something. "Let me see your arm." Calmly, or as calmly as possible under the conditions she was in, Karen walked through the village and towards the Konoha hospital. The building was several stories tall, and it was now in her view as she casually walked to it. She was under a henge to make her look like a nurse and one of the hospital's regular staff. From the information that Naruto had told her, she would be sneaking in through one of the back entrances of the hospital and making her way to the records room. Getting into the hospital wouldn't be that hard as it really wasn't a very secure building. There were many ninja in the building, but the majority were either visitors or patients. Few ninjas seemed to be patrolling the building, and she could feel them as well as evade them with her sensor abilities. Watching over one of the service entrances, she waited for an opening and then went in to pick the lock on the door. With the door opened, she made her way through the maintenance area of the hospital and to the stairwell. The main records room was on the middle floor of the building so as to be better accessible to all floors. Stopping in the stairwell before she entered the correct floor, she sensed the entire floor for chakra signatures that belonged to ninja. She only detected a few signatures that were larger than a civilian, but it was hard to tell whether they belonged to ninja or just medical nin. Once the hallway was clear, she entered through the stairwell door and closed it behind her without making much noise. Casually walking down the hall, she headed to where Naruto indicated the records room was. Passing several locked rooms, she eventually came to the correct room. Reaching out, she checked the door and found it locked, which she already assumed it would be. Kneeling down, she pulled out her lock-picking tools and went to work on the door. It didn't take very long before the lock clicked to tell her that the door was open, and she proceeded to enter the room. Looking around at the numerous filing cabinets, she thought about where to start first and realized that she didn't know one key piece of information. "My surname is Uzumaki," stated a disembodied voice from inside her head. Karen jumped slightly at the intrusion of the voice into her thoughts, but then calmed down and absently touched her arm that had the seal on it. When Naruto had created the storage seal on her arm, she had no idea what his thought process was when he sealed a hinged clone into it. She thought perhaps he was sending backup for her, but it was really so that he could extend whatever thought-projecting abilities he had and communicate with her while they were separated. She had questioned whether it was necessary and suggested a wireless radio, but he told her that their conversation could be picked up by other radios that the ANBU used. Opening file drawers until she came upon the U's, she quickly skimmed the names until she found what she was looking for. Pulling it out, she noticed that it was rather thin. Putting the file under her arm, she closed the drawer to the cabinet and made her way out of the room. Before she left, she sensed the floor she was on and found a ninja or medical nin walking down the long hallway right towards her. Panicking, she looked around the room for somewhere to hide as she wouldn't be able to leave the room without being spotted, and she couldn't be sure that her henge of a random nurse would be able to pass scrutiny in a place where everyone knew each other. She looked everywhere in the room but found nothing. "Stop panicking," came Naruto's voice in her head, and she calmed down slightly. "If you can't find a hiding place, then you'll just have to make one." A shadow appeared, blocking the light of the slit at the bottom of the door. The handle turned and the door opened to reveal a nurse. The nurse walked in rather frustrated as someone had again forgotten to lock the records room door and then proceeded to organize the files she was carrying into the correct cabinets. It took a few minutes to finish, and once she was done, she headed back to the door of the room. Along the short path to the door, she noted a filing cabinet that was much shorter than the rest. She stopped to look at it briefly as she wondered if it had been there when she was in the room earlier that day. She continued walking to the door a moment later and ignored the small oddity as she had other work to do. Closing the door on her way out, she headed back to tend to her patients. A moment elapsed before the filing cabinet the nurse had been looking at went up in smoke. The smoke cleared to reveal a crouched and relieved Karen. Before she stood up, she sensed the chakra signatures in the area to make sure no one else was coming and that the coast was clear. She exhaled when she found no one in the immediate area and left the records room with the file in hand. Closing the door soundlessly behind her, she moved quickly back the way she came and exited the hospital. Karen handed the file to Naruto and waited with her arms crossed as he leafed through the pages. Sifting through his own medical records, which he had never looked at before, he glanced at all of the information and numbers just in case there was something he missed or didn't know about himself. A good portion of the file needed to be altered because it was too difficult to change the body to match the file. The last physical he had indicated that he was a few inches shorter and actually a little heavier than the corpse he had acquired, but that physical had been months ago, so all he needed to alter was the blood type and a few other parts of his records. Besides that, the corpse's face needed to be changed to match his. Pulling out the scroll with the corpse in it, he motioned to an earthen operating table nearby that he had created while Karen was getting the file. Karen walked to it and watched with some interest as Naruto set down a scroll on the flat rock surface and then proceeded to unroll it. What she didn't know was that it contained the corpse of her teammate that had been preserved inside the scroll for about a month. They had a short window in which to alter the body, and Naruto wanted it as fresh as possible, so he had used a special preservation scroll. The body's time of death could be determined by a medical examiner, but with careful planning and preservation, the body's time of death would nearly fit with his supposed death when the battle started. There was unfortunately some error, but it couldn't be helped and was unavoidable for his plans. Putting his hands in the ram seal, he unsealed the scroll. Karen leaned forward to see what it was, and when the smoke cleared, she screamed and then fainted. Frowning, Naruto sighed and then sealed back up the body, since Karen obviously wouldn't be doing anything until she gained consciousness. Perhaps I should have warned her first? Naruto wondered, and a small smile formed on his face. Karen regained consciousness several minutes later, and Naruto explained to her everything that he wanted her to do to the corpse before he unsealed it again. The operation proceeded better than expected. While still squeamish about working on the body of her former teammate, Karen managed to create an exact replica of Naruto's face. Everything was finished in less time than Naruto thought it would take. He spent several minutes inspecting the body and the seal he had placed before he determined that it was as good a replica as it could be. The body was then sealed up. While Karen was changing the face and he was applying the seal to the stomach, one of his clones had gone about altering the medical records to reflect the new body before him. Once everything was completed, Karen was sent back to the hospital to put his records back. He would only need to wait a few more days before the Chunin exam finals, and then he would be able to leave the village. Plagueye's eyes once again moved over a group of scientists that were now working for him. He inspected what they were working on and moved on to another area of the facility. He currently had several groups of Snow Country scientists working on multiple projects for him. One group was making several chakra armor devices based on Doto's advanced prototype. He added in a bit of his own knowledge to the devices, but with the facilities and resources he had, he wasn't able to do much to the devices or make them much better than the original design. Another group was finishing up synthesizing the ship sealant in another part of Doto's castle. A small chemical factory had been constructed with the materials brought to the island that Naruto had sealed onto the boat. Production of the sealant would begin shortly. The final group was working on analyzing a strange device in the mountains that Doto was interested in. The dictator was positive that the device was a weapon, but upon inspection and testing, it turned out that the notion was mistaken and the device built by Doto's brother was not a weapon. It was actually some type of climate control device that required a specialized key to activate. The device itself was not yet completed, but Plagueye's managed to get his hands on detailed plans for it from records as well as from what the scientists had put together. The device was supposed to drastically alter the snow-covered island and keep it stuck in a single season of the year. He, as well as the scientists, were still not completely sure of how the device worked, as despite his vast knowledge, he could not completely determine how several key components function from just a set of blueprints, though he could guess. Accessing these components for further study would require dismantling portions of the device, as the plans did not explain what they did or how they functioned. In order to get a better idea, he would either have to dismantle the entire device, find the key and activate it for study, or construct his own similar device. He currently had other things to worry about though, and needed most of the scientists for other endeavors, so that he would have to wait and perhaps construct a device once they were back in the known galaxy. It wasn't a big loss, however, as he currently had no need for a climate control device, but it was something of interest and he would look into it at a later date. His last transmission with his student was also still stuck in his thoughts. He had the feeling that Naruto was keeping information from him but wasn't sure what that information was. His thoughts were filled with notions of what that information could be, and he had thoroughly analyzed each possibility. They ranged from his student being influenced by the kunoichi that was now working for them, to his student plotting against him. It seemed more likely that Naruto was being influenced by the red-headed girl than plotting against him, but he had no way to be sure. He planned to investigate into the matter once his student arrived in Snow Country. The morning of the Chunin exam finals arrived and Naruto hadn't slept at all the night before. He spent most of the night meditating and going over everything that he would be doing and what would be happening. The plan had been adjusted slightly as Karen could now be trusted, and so she was given a larger part in the day's events. He already sent the girl outside of the village with all of her possessions in a single scroll attached to the back of her waist and with exact instructions on what she was supposed to do as well as when she was to do it. Now all that was left was to complete the final stage of the plan and leave the village. It was a shame that he never managed to find his parents' house or any other information on where they had lived or where any of their possessions were. That kind of information was likely only in the minds of a select few individuals in the entire village, and it was possible that only the Hokage knew, so he wasn't able to get it. It was unfortunate, but before the battle was over that day, he would have much more information to make up for it. Sitting safely inside the top entrance to his hideout, he created several shadow clones that would be needed later when Orochimaru's surprise attack started. He had a very large scroll next to him which he would use in a little while, and he had a shadow clone heading to his duty station at the outer wall that had the scroll with the corpse in it. He would wait as long as possible before releasing the preserved corpse inside the scroll and taking control over it in order to fake his death. According to Kabuto's memories, Orochimaru would give a signal which would alert the Suna forces outside of the wall to summon a large snake summon that had been provided for them. That signal would also start an attack in the stadium, and with both events happening, it would give him plenty of time and a good enough distraction for what he had planned. Waiting was problematic, but it was inevitable, and he sat down in a meditative position to better control the clone heading toward the wall. Sitting with a frown on her face, Karen absently adjusted her glasses while waiting for the exact moment to use the scroll next to her. She wasn't completely sure what she was doing by this large lake or what the special scroll she had been given would do, but she knew that when the exact time came, she was to add chakra to it. Glancing at the new and expensive watch, she smiled slightly at the gift she had been given. Part of her knew that it was only given to her for this specific task, but she liked it nonetheless. It was disconcerting though that all of her other possessions managed to fit in a single scroll that she was carrying with her. It did have numerous storage seals in it, but the scroll itself was so small. She still hadn't been completely informed on what was going to happen, but she definitely knew that they were leaving the village and that it would be attacked in some way by an outside force. She was glad that she wouldn't be inside the village when the attack that Naruto had mentioned would be occurring, but she did have some concern for her friend Tenten. They were getting along well, but she hadn't been told about the attack early enough to warn her friend about it, and she couldn't help but wonder if Tenten would be alright. There was no telling how destructive the battle would be, and she had no idea if the village would survive or not. Part of her wanted to stay in the village as she found it much nicer than her previous one, but that was not her decision. Her mind moved from those thoughts to her current location. Something told her that the lake wasn't randomly chosen by Naruto and that it had some significance to him. However, she had no idea what that significance was. While the noise from the beginning match filled the stadium and part of the village, Danzo's Route ANBU headquarters heard none of the fighting or celebration. In his underground location, Danzo sat at his desk in his small Spartan office and once again viewed through the many reports that he had at his disposal and that had been collected over the course of several years. He was sure that all of the files in front of him concerned the Kyuubi container and was just finishing drawing possible conclusions from them. His red eye looked through all of the documents and he reviewed everything he had. He needed to make a decision, and the Chunin exam finals, when most of the village was distracted, would be an opportune time to perform any unsanctioned and illegal action. The only decision that he had made was that he could no longer take the wait-and-see approach, as he felt he could not gain any more information from monitoring the Jinchuriki. The information seemed to begin with the memory erasing of a Jonin, followed by the assassination of a Genin, and then the memory erasing of a Chunin. From what he could tell, the container had discovered 2 plots to steal items from the village and had intercepted or used the 2 ninja as scapegoats and walked away with 3 items of great value to the village. He also knew that the Genin had been killed in order to get a spot on a seasoned Genin team and achieve a higher ninja rank at a faster pace during peacetime in the village. Though these events were of concern, the events after that were what he was focusing on. After Uzumaki Naruto had been placed on the Genin team with Yakushi Kabuto and Akato Yoroi was of interest to him. At the end of the second stage of the Chunin exams, both Genin were determined to be spies for Orochimaru. This was the second time that he had come across the Sannin's name in relation to the Kyuubi container, and this greatly concerned him. From what he could tell, there was no evidence that the container was ever involved with Orochimaru until joining that Genin team. Uzumaki most likely read the mind of the Genin that he replaced and found out that the entire Genin team were spies for Orochimaru. However, he said nothing and was put on the team without any problems and never once tried to implicate either Genin as spies. Danzo concluded from the information he had. When followed to Wave Country, Orochimaru's name came up again in a coded talk with the deceased shipping mogul Gato. This information put several theories into his mind that the Kyuubi container started working for Orochimaru and that Gato was also connected to the Sannin. Orochimaru had stayed well hidden, and having someone like Gato with his shipping business would definitely have helped the Sannin stay hidden and move things without anyone noticing. However, other recent events had disproved this theory. While Kabuto had escaped and then later tried to kill Uchiha Sasuke, Akato Yoroi had not escaped and was captured by Sai. Interrogation was only able to get a small amount of information out of the Genin spy before he was killed between interrogation sessions in the Intelligence and Interrogations Divisions building. The death was made to look like a suicide, but everyone suspected that someone infiltrated the secure building and assassinated the Genin. The entire Ninja Council had been worried that both Genin being spies meant that the container was also a spy, but Yoroi did reveal that his former teammate was not a spy or had any connection with Orochimaru. This information contradicted his earlier assumptions. Other information taken from the Genin hinted that Orochimaru was planning something during the Chunin exam finals, but the Genin was not informed of what that something was. The village was now on high alert, but no one knew what would happen or what Orochimaru was planning, and only the Ninja Council knew the full details of this information. The theory he had now was that the container was working by himself and for his own interests. He liked this theory much less than his previous one, as it implied that the container had somehow learned to read minds by himself without any help or was somehow being influenced by the bijou sealed inside. There was no evidence that the boy was influenced or had ever used the Kyuubi's chakra, but the incident a month ago spoke differently. It also implied that the container was far more devious, skilled, and calculating than he originally assumed. With such a confusing and troubling situation, the best that he could come up with was that Uzumaki Naruto was a very worthy opponent in terms of working from the shadows and had accomplished a great deal and grown very powerful without much scrutiny. This was a very problematic conclusion and was the reason that he could not simply wait and see. During the month break for the Chunin exam finals, he done everything he could to learn more about the Jinchuriki and try to find any incriminating evidence. He had his own ninja try and keep tabs on the boy and his activities, looked through all the files he had, and tried to find any information from sources inside or outside the village. He called in favors with ANBU members that he had personally trained, and the boy's apartment had been thoroughly and illegally searched for any of the stolen items that the village was still looking for. Nothing was found except numerous empty hiding places created throughout the entire apartment. This led Danzo to believe that the boy had a secret hiding place elsewhere for the stolen items. Without any idea where it could be, and after a month of monitoring the container's activities without finding anything, he was forced to consider other possibilities and look for anything that stood out. The patience required to be followed for over a month and not make a single mistake or do anything of note stuck out as something very odd. What little he had on the container suggested that the boy was impulsive and didn't like to wait. This was the complete opposite of the patient person that had only performed their duty for an entire month and had done nothing of note nor any extracurricular activity. The boy hadn't even trained in the training grounds for an entire month, and he had trouble finding any information that the container had ever used the training grounds for personal training. This made little sense for a ninja of special Jonin status that had risen through the ranks so quickly. The notion of a small hiding place had therefore been changed to a larger hiding place that could accommodate room for a single person to train in. From Fu's monitoring, a discrepancy was noted in the early mornings with the amount of chakra that the boy had. Fu thought it was lower than what he had noted in the past when following the boy. He now suspected that the boy was using shadow clones to perform his duties within the village. There was little chance of a clone being found out or dispelled while performing standard guard duty, and with the boy's chakra reserves, the clones could last for a long time. This supported the idea of a large hiding place but didn't consider how the switch between real and fake was being made or where the shadow clones were coming from, because they never seemed to go anywhere else but guard duty, out to eat, and the apartment building. This implied that the hiding place was at one of these locations, and a seamless switch could be made between clone or original, or a new clone could switch with an old one without anyone seeing. Looking through the papers once again for anything that stood out, he also glanced at the plans for the buildings that the container passed on his routine trips from the apartment, and finally noticed something. On one of Fu's early reports, he noted that a strange chakra disruption when the boy entered the stairwell that led to his apartment. This had been noted on several reports but stopped occurring in more recent reports, and Danzo's eyes narrowed as he pulled out the blueprints for the container's building. It wasn't an apartment building but a storehouse that had an apartment on the roof. Finding the stairwell, Danzo found that it was completely closed off and no one from the outside, those following the container, could see inside. The container disappeared from view while in the stairwell and was only visible while entering or exiting it. That left many seconds unaccounted for, and several floors of stairwell where a switch could be made. The building plans did not indicate any rooms right by the stairwell that could be used for such a hidden area, but everything else fit. Sitting back in his chair, Danzo thought about what he should now do with the knowledge that he had. The village had a rogue Jinchuriki that was erasing and reading the minds of ninja in the village, stealing village secrets, using the Kyuubi's chakra, and that had an unknown agenda. Something needed to be done, and he decided to take both Fu and Torian with him. The controlled clone was standing in the watchtower along the eastern wall of the village with the other ninja that were on guard duty. Looking out over the forest where he knew several hundred ninja were hiding and possibly looking back at him, the clone pulled out the scroll. He needed to unseal the body as close to the attack as possible, but he had no idea when exactly that was. There was no decided time like he had made with Karen, but only a rough estimate. Using the force, he made the motion of throwing something in a direction but didn't actually send anything flying. The guards were all on their feet as they just had a strong feeling that something was happening in the direction that Naruto indicated. While the guards were all distracted, the clone unsealed the body and then used the dead soul technique on the corpse. The technique was quickly completed and the heart restarted, which let him control the body. It stood and the clone dispelled. The control he was using on the shadow clone was switched with the corpse. The dead body stood and then walked over to see what the other ninja were looking at. The force technique he used had distracted the ninja enough that they were unaware of the noise he was making behind them and completely focused on the direction he indicated. Eventually they decided that whatever it was that had attracted their attention was no longer of interest or even important in the first place, and went back to playing cards. With the switch completed, Naruto controlled the corpse and waited for the attack to commence. Despite having his eyes watching the fight between Uchiha Sasuke and Sabaku no Gaara, the Sandame's thoughts were elsewhere. He was still not sure what was happening with Naruto or what the boy was up to. Nothing made sense, and even though his ninja had been secretly monitoring the boy for nearly a month, they had not found anything notable or that would indicate Naruto had some kind of agenda. Even Jiraiya had checked in on the boy from time to time and not found anything out of the ordinary. His apartment had been searched and everything that Naruto did was closely monitored, but nothing came up. He also acknowledged the fact that Naruto may know about the ANBU following him and made sure to not do anything suspicious. Something was definitely going on, but he still could not determine what that something was or how Naruto was involved. Another concern was Orochimaru, as his former student was definitely planning something and he couldn't help but wonder if Naruto was somehow involved in his former student's plans for the village. With Naruto's former genin teammates turning out to both be spies for Orochimaru, anything was possible. The genin Yoroi had not given them much to go on before being assassinated, and it was still difficult to believe that the village could be so easily infiltrated by spies and that an assassination could occur in such a secure facility. The likely culprit was Naruto's former teammate Yakushi Kabuto, who was far more competent and skilled than any report or archived file revealed. The former Konoha genin had gotten past numerous umbu with ease. He was still questioning whether Naruto had any knowledge of either of his teammates being spies, but it didn't seem that likely, as even the Jonin sensei was oblivious to the genin's involvement in espionage for Orochimaru. He desperately wished he could answer any of the questions and concerns that had been constantly on his mind in the last month, but the answers continued to elude him as he looked down at the battle between the two boys. Through what little force connection he had in the revived and controlled body, Naruto could feel the tension starting to build, which told him that something would happen soon. It seemed to swell from the forest and the arena as well as a few other places, so he decided that the battle was imminent and he should start the plan. The guard towers were placed at intervals along the top of the thick village wall, and a person could walk between them. The area that Naruto needed to be was slightly off from the guard tower he was in. The snake summoning ritual was placed within 100 feet or so from that general area, and the snake would likely come right through the area. Moving out of the tower, he started walking along the wall for a short distance. A few of the station ninja asked where he was going, and he replied that he thought he saw something and was going to investigate. Not 20 feet from tower, smoke started rising from the stadium, and then right after that kunai peppered the watchtower he was just in. He maneuvered the corpse to dodge the kunai and didn't have to wait a few more seconds before smoke filled the section of forest in front of him. The smoke bulged out and a giant three-headed snake emerged that charged the wall right where he was standing. As it charged for his position, he had to stop himself from trying to dodge it. He made it seem like he froze in shock and surprise at the coming summon. Only a moment passed before the snake reached the wall, and instead of letting himself be hit, he used the force to gently push the body away from the snake and fell off the wall as the snake slammed through it. The force of the snake's impact sent debris everywhere while he was falling, and he was struck by the belly of the snake as it fell, but used the force to limit the amount of damage to the body. Despite being hit, the body was caught with the debris and ended up buried while the snake stopped for a moment to attack the ninja in the area. Being conscious while your body was hit by a snake and then crushed under debris was a very strange experience, and Naruto waited for a few more moments before stopping the technique. He made sure that the corpse was buried as deep as possible and would not be found until after the cleanup started. With the rubble and the fighting, it could be days before that body was discovered. After that, it could take a few more days before it was properly identified, depending on the damage done to it and the fact that the priority of the Konoha hospital was for the living. With all of the injured people as a result of the battle, the hospital would be flooded with patients and everyone would be attending to them, including any doctors or examiners that normally work on autopsies. The minimum amount of time before his body was discovered was at least several days. An autopsy would inevitably be done to make sure it was him, as the council would call for it. The forged records would match up with the discovered body and everything would match. It would likely be determined from the autopsy that he was instantly killed when the summons broke through the wall, and all of the other injuries were caused right after death, because of the debris. No one had been left alive that had seen him die, as the ninja in the watchtowers had all been killed by the kunai or the summon. Therefore, no one would be actively looking for his body until it was discovered that he was missing or the debris was cleaned up and the corpse was found. They had other priorities, and he didn't have any friends or people that would be worried about him, save for perhaps the Sandaime. It was likely that by the time the body was confirmed as his own, he would already be on his way to or in snow country. A pair of blue eyes opened back in the top entrance to the hideout, and Naruto turned to his shadow clones while pulling out the large scroll he had. He unrolled the scroll and unsealed multiple smaller storage scrolls that were filled with empty storage seals and a few items that the clones would need for their mission. Each clone picked up a scroll and upon the mental command from the creator, they hinged into Sound Ninja and then used an earth technique to meld with the rock of the mountain and move to complete their missions. Naruto left the scroll where it was and then went about destroying the Sith runes on the entrance to the hideout as he had done with the runes inside of the hideout. He left most of the Fuinjutsu, but it wasn't a good idea to leave the Sith runes once he left because they could be discovered and it was not something he wanted anyone else to know about. He then removed several small square pieces of parchment from his cloak. Each had a seal on it with the kanji for suppress. Lifting up his shirt, he put one on his stomach and another on his chest, then stuck one on each of the upper parts of his arms. Forming the ram seal, he activated the seals and completely suppressed his chakra network. Picking up the large and now empty scroll, he walked out of the entrance to the hideout and to the edge of the Hokage monument above the faces of the Hokage. Looking over the village as he had done many times in the past, he had a good view of the battle currently happening in the village. His eyes roamed the village walls and then peered at the stadium where a large dark purple barrier had been created. Reaching up to his forehead, he pulled down his goggles and zoomed in on the area to see what was happening. While battles took place over the village, groups of Naruto's clones went to 3 locations in the village. One group went to the Hokage Tower to copy down any information or techniques that could be of use to him. The Hokage Tower, specifically the Hokage's library and study, had numerous books and other information that could definitely be useful to him. A second group went to the library to finish getting the information there. The final group went to infiltrate Route ANBU headquarters and take anything that they could find. With Jiraiya's knowledge of seals, he had a few better methods for copying down information than just doing it by hand, and each clone had the supplies to do it. He periodically checked in on his clones to supervise what information they were taking. He only had a limited amount of time before Karen acted on his instructions and wanted to get everything he could, but the clones still needed to get back to his position. He couldn't be seen, felt, or tracked leaving the village, and while having so many ninja fighting in the village was a distraction, it also put him at risk of getting spotted, attacked, or caught. He found a much better way to leave the village that left no trail. Unnoticed by him or his clones, Danzo was already making his way towards his apartment building. Despite a battle going on near the village wall, Danzo and his 2 best Route ANBU, Fu and Toryun, made their way to the building where the Kyuubi container's apartment was. Each member was being extremely cautious to not get caught or spotted by Konoha ninja, but most of the battle was away from where they were. Stopping at the entrance to the stairwell of the building, Danzo glanced over at Fu, who sensed the area to make sure no one was around, and then pulled off the wrappings on his face to reveal the Sharingan. They then proceeded to enter the stairwell, which did not have a door but merely an open entrance. They didn't have to go far before Danzo's eyes spotted a disturbance behind the staircase on the ground floor. The wall itself appeared slightly different than the rest of the walls, and his eye picked up the small differences enough to know that an earth jutsu had been used to seal something up. Pulling out a kunai, Danzo charged wind chakra into it and elongated the blade, then slashed the wall. Putting the kunai back beneath his robes, he kicked the wall and sent the thin material inward and into an open area. It seemed to be an entrance that was covered over, and the floor in the tunnel steadily went downhill. Toryun examined the area for traps but found none, and so the 3 moved through the hole and into the tunnel, unsure of where it would lead them. Naruto's head jerked in the direction of his apartment building as he knew that someone had destroyed the thin wall that he had put up to hide the tunnel to his hideout. He had removed the Sith runes and illusion earlier that morning. The only thing that he had left was the Fuinjutsu that prevented chakra signatures from being felt outside of the hideout and a makeshift earthen wall. His heartbeat increased slightly as he realized that someone was likely heading to his hideout, and he had removed the defenses. It puzzled him how it had been discovered, and he wondered who had found his secret entrance. Glancing at his watch, he saw that he had several minutes before his time was up. The clones were nearly finished and the group from the library were already on their way back. It would take a while for whoever it was to explore his hideout, but that didn't mean that they wouldn't go to the top entrance, which was the original entrance to the space behind the Hokage's faces, and find him there. His clones were also safe from detection, as the fuinjutsu that prevented chakra from being felt inside the hideout would also prevent any chakra sensors inside the hideout from feeling chakra signatures outside of the hideout as well. It was a caveat of the fuinjutsu he chose to place in the hideout. It was easier to use than other seals, and since he couldn't feel chakra anyway, there was no point in worrying about it. Despite the fact that he could have relocated his current position, the area he was in was the best place to be, as he could see everything that was happening and no one would look at the Hokage monument when the fight was elsewhere. It might be close, but he contacted his clones and told them to hurry up. He wanted to leave before anyone found him. With his chakra sealed, he would have to fight with the force only, and he wasn't sure who he would be facing or if it was multiple ninja or not. The three ninja moved silently through the black tunnel. The light had faded and they were going by Danzo's Sharingan, which could partially pierce the darkness of the tunnel. Fu told the others that he could no longer feel any chakra signatures from the village, as something was blocking his sensing ability. Though Danzo didn't want to admit it, he was very interested where the tunnel would lead. He originally thought the secret area was just a hole in the ground, but this was definitely more extensive and well planned. He instantly noticed the jutsu that was used to create the tunnel, as he had used the very same, though modified, jutsu when his root headquarters was created. There also appeared to be some other fuinjutsu active in the tunnel as well. "How far do you think we've traveled?" inquired Torian to the group, and Fu answered, "A couple 100 feet, we may be nearly under the Hokage monument by now. I still can't feel anything from the outside." Danzo stayed silent until he stopped walking. "We've reached a dead end," he stated, and glanced around the pitch-black area. He thought at first that it was another wall, but his eye was able to see that the ceiling above them was open. "What do we do now?" asked Fu, and Danzo responded, "We go up." The clones from the library returned and several hands came up from the ground to deposit scrolls at his feet. He didn't want to risk having one of his clones sensed anymore and couldn't seal the scrolls into his large scroll because he had sealed off his own chakra. Improvising, he took out ninja wire and attached the small scrolls to the strap of the larger scroll like a bandolier. The situation annoyed him greatly, and it wasn't the best solution, but he could do little else without the possibility of alerting someone to where he was. Other people could be looking for him as well, and they might find him if he unsealed his chakra. The clones from the Hokage Tower had just finished, but the clones from the secret base would take slightly longer as it was deep in the ground and farther away than the other locations. Danzo had placed his base next to the Hokage mountain and nearly up against the village wall. The base had a passage out of the village and was still technically inside the village. He glanced at his watch again to see that he only had a few minutes before Karen would act. Looking back over the village, he saw trees form inside the barrier that the Sandaime and Orochimaru were fighting in. This intrigued him, but there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. Pulling down his goggles again, he tried to get a better look inside the purple barrier. After running vertically for over 200 feet, the three ninja emerged into a much lighter area. It was quite a large cave-like area, and they briefly wondered exactly where in the Hokage mountain they were before they turned around. Looking at the wall behind them, they saw the reverse impression of the Hokage's faces. Danzo's eyes widened slightly as he realized just where he was and how extensive the hideout was. He signaled to both his ninja, and they went about exploring the area for anything of importance. It was possible that the room was filled with traps, contained a clone or more, or perhaps contained the hiding Kyuubi container. The last thing he wanted was a battle with a Jinchuriki that could access some of its Bijuu's power. He knew that he did have the needed abilities, Sharingan and Mokuton, to suppress that power, but he didn't want to have the confrontation get to that point. He hoped to get the jump on the container, but the hideout appeared completely empty. Evidently the size of the original cave had been increased and multiple smaller offshoots had been created for other rooms. Such an extensive area, and right under the villages and Hokage's nose, or noses so to speak. Danzo thought. He couldn't believe that the entire time the container had been hiding behind the faces of the Hokage monument and that no one had ever figured it out. Fu should have been able to sense the boy's chakra if he was hiding here, so he must have used something else to mask it. he surmised, and started examining the walls and fuinjutsu on them a little closer while his subordinates explored the rest of the area. They were under orders to find the container and then alert him first before engaging. The clones from the tower had just given him the scrolls, and now he was waiting on the clones from the secret base. He could feel the life signs of 3 individuals below him and wasn't completely sure he could defeat all 3 by himself without any of his chakra. He recognized one as Fu, the other as Danzo, but had no idea who the third one was. Danzo may have appeared as a crippled old man, but Naruto knew otherwise, and the other 2 would be difficult to face as well. They had yet to make any motion to go to the top of the Hokage mountain and seemed to be exploring the area he had created behind the faces. This bought him some time, but he wasn't sure which would happen first, that Karen would activate the scroll, that his shadow clones would return, or that he would be confronted by the 3 ninja. Trying to remain calm in the situation, he looked toward the finishing battle in the village. It seemed to be wrapping up as a giant toad had appeared to fight the snake summons, and then he noticed the barrier coming down near the stadium. He could see through his goggles that the Sandaime was on the ground and Orochimaru was jumping away. The snake Sannin seemed to be having great difficulty moving his arms, and Naruto was at a loss to what was causing it until he noticed the seal present on the exposed skin of the Hokage's stomach. It looked like his own seal, and he remembered from the scroll of seal what the jutsu was that the Sandaime must have used. So, he summoned a being that would remove the soul of his opponent. He thought, as he had been very suspicious of what the jutsu actually did. He had heard of the Shinigami, but Plagueyes had not believed in such a thing, or that the jutsu worked that way. From what he could tell, the jutsu didn't seem very powerful, as Orochimaru was only not able to move his arms while the Sandaime seemed either dead or dying. He watched the fleeing Sannin with interest though. The man was practically being carried by the 4 guards that had created the barrier. Plagueyes had told him that he couldn't face Orochimaru as he would likely be defeated, but his master's words were no longer true, as it appeared that Orochimaru could not move his arms or hands. Not being able to use ninjutsu or fight with his arms would severely cripple his fighting ability and give a great advantage to any opponent. He knew the location of Orochimaru's base in Sound Country from Kabuto's memories, and the Sannin was injured, possibly requiring a very long recuperation period. His instincts were telling him to follow the man back to Sound Country. With his chakra-suppressing seals, he could sneak up on Orochimaru to finish what the Sandaime started. The man's head was likely full of techniques and information that would be valuable to both he and Plagueyes. Coming back to reality, he made a decision about the situation and noted that the last of his clones were finished and heading back to him. Danzo and the other 2 ninja had also nearly finished going through his former hideout. Fu and Toryun returned, but with nothing to show. Apparently, the entire hideout was empty and everything that could be valuable had been removed. Quickly moving to the final path, which presumably was the exit, they headed down the darkening tunnel. Fu could not detect the container because of the fuinjutsu, but he could tell that the container had been inside the hideout not an hour before. The boy had such a large amount of chakra that he left traces wherever he went. It appeared that the container was trying to leave the village during the battle. This was unacceptable to Danzo. The boy was a key piece in his plans for Konoha's conquest of the other villages, and leaving the village would likely make the boy a target that other villages would want to get their hands on, or perhaps that Madara would want to get his hands on. The question was now, where is the Kyuubi container? The fact that only a few moments ago the container had been inside the hideout, while he reported to duty hours ago and was in the midst of a battle, meant he was likely nearby and perhaps still inside the village. It also meant that they had been monitoring a clone. Fu should be able to find the boy if they got out of the hideout. Naruto tried to calm his breathing as he felt the 3 ninja head to his location. Have they found me, or are they just leaving the hideout to search? He wondered, but couldn't get an exact answer. Glancing to his watch again, he noted that he only had less than a minute left. At that moment, several hands came out of the ground and handed him scrolls. He decided to just hold on to the scrolls as he couldn't seal them anywhere, and his body already had numerous ones attached to the strap of the large scroll on his shoulder. The seconds counted down as the ninja reached the end of the entrance to his hideout. Looking again at the watch, He glared at it as it now indicated that several seconds had passed after the specific time he had given to Karen. What the hell is she doing? A beeping went off that caught the attention of several animals in the nearby forest. It also woke a redhead that was sleeping against a tree near the edge of the lake. A bleary-eyed Karen tried to find out what the beeping was and why it was disturbing her nap. It took a few moments to realize that it was coming from her watch, and then her eyes widened as she saw that 10 seconds had elapsed past the time she was given to use the scroll. Shit! She yelled and looked frantically for the scroll that was still leaning on the tree she had been napping against. Grabbing it, she opened the scroll and started pouring her chakra into it. I can't let them see me, thought Naruto, and he looked for anything that he could do to hide. There was no cover to hide behind, and the only thing he could think of were the tops of the Hokage's heads, which varied in height below the edge of the Hokage mountain. Jumping off the edge, he landed on the top of the Yandame's head. He couldn't use the tree climbing exercise, so he couldn't get down the mountain unless he jumped, and there was no guarantee that he wouldn't be seriously hurt if he couldn't break or slow his fall with the force. Danzo and his 2 ninja exited the tunnel and found themselves on the top of the Hokage mountain. They quickly looked for any clues to where the Jinchuriki had gone. Fu informed him of the residual chakra in the area, and his Sharingan could pick a faint trace of the Kyuubi container's chakra, but no real trail was left for them to follow. Going on a hunch, Danzo walked to the edge of the Hokage mountain. For some reason he had the feeling that something was there. He reached the edge, but saw nothing but the tops of the heads of the Hokage faces. The smoke cleared to reveal a glaring Naruto, and Karen would not meet his gaze. You were late and I nearly got caught, he stated, and she immediately started giving him different excuses ranging from the watch malfunctioning to his own watch being fast and numerous other explanations in between. Naruto merely sighed and tossed all the scrolls to her so she could seal them up in the large scroll for easier travel. She was still far too useful for him to even think about killing her over falling asleep on the job. Pulling out another scroll from his pouch, he had Karen open the contents. Confused, Karen watched as he started putting ink on a brush and drawing some piece of fuinjutsu on the parchment. When the drawing was complete, he handed the parchment to her and she accepted the still wet fuinjutsu. When I tell you, place this on the surface, said Naruto seriously, and it took a moment for Karen to try and comprehend what he might be referring to, but nothing came to mind. What surface? She questioned while looking around. You'll see in a moment, answered Naruto, and he walked to the edge of the lake. Closing his eyes, he concentrated on the object that he knew was still at the bottom of this particular lake. The force flowed through him and the water surface began to bubble. Karen stared at the new phenomenon on the surface of the lake and felt Naruto using that strange extra power that he had. So, this lake was important, but only for something in it, she concluded, and her eyes were fixated on the lake. With both hands stretched out with open palm and fingers, Naruto concentrated as hard as he could on the object and making it rise to the surface. He would succeed, and the seal would be placed on the hull of the ship as it was necessary for his plans, and failure was not an option. This was the only way he found to get the ship out of the water that didn't involve creating a gigantic 30-foot-long or more storage scroll. He had only finished it a couple of weeks ago and was much more confident about the process now that he had most Jiraiya seal knowledge in his head. He couldn't sneak out of the village or alert anyone to this location and hadn't visited the ship for months. His efforts were rewarded with the sound of water churning and a large bulge forming on the surface. He couldn't see it as his eyes were closed in concentration, but he knew it was happening. The surface continued to bulge until the water gave way to reveal a muddy shape coming out of the water. Naruto stopped his progress as he only needed a small portion of the ship exposed for his plan. Waiting a brief moment, he nearly dropped the ship as he realized that Karen was just standing there. Karen! He yelled, and she came back to her senses and remembered she was supposed to do something. Put it on that? She questioned and received a nod of the head from Naruto. As she ran across the lake surface, Naruto's arms started to shake from the exertion of holding the ship steady. He didn't have much time before he needed to let it go. He would have liked to use a shadow cloned for this instead of Karen, but he still couldn't let anyone feel his chakra signature because Danzo was likely actively searching for him and would definitely come after him. Coming to the muddy object that was sticking out of the water, she noted that a very large shadow was beneath her and that whatever object it was, must be far larger than the little area that was showing. Stopping at the exposed site, she held the wet scroll in one hand and started scraping off enough of the mud to find a hard and flat surface. She was greatly surprised that the surface underneath appeared to be completely made of metal. Pushing the rest of the mud off the surface, she placed the parchment flat down and then added chakra to the paper to finish the seal. The moment the seal was set, she removed the parchment from the now set seal and the object started to sink back down. Gritting his teeth, Naruto gently let the ship come to rest at the bottom of the lake once again. Falling to his knees, he took in deep ragged breaths as the task had taken a great deal from him. A few minutes passed before Karen spoke. "What was that thing?" She questioned, as even from what little she saw of the object, it looked like nothing she had ever seen before. "You'll find out soon enough," Naruto answered as he calmed his breathing and attempted to stand up on shaky knees. Pouting, Karen gave him a glare as she really wanted to know what it was. It was obviously important, but she wondered why he was leaving it and what the Fuinjutsu was for. Naruto ignored the look and glanced in the direction he knew Sound Country to be. He should be heading to Snow Country at this point, but he wanted to go to Sound Country and had a feeling through the force that this was what he should do. It would be best to get to Orochimaru's hideout before the man and entourage did in order to set traps or a surprise attack when they got back, but that was unlikely to happen. Orochimaru had a lead on him, and while the man couldn't use his arms, his legs didn't seem all that damaged and he had 4 ninja to help him back. Though he had been told not to try and fight Orochimaru, his next step was to get to Sound Country as fast as possible. "So where are we going?" asked Karen as she adjusted her glasses and then gathered her belongings. "Sound Country for a brief period and then our final destination," responded Naruto, and he jumped to the nearest tree. Karen frowned slightly at the answer and what it would mean, but followed him anyway. She was curious about what they were going to do and why his chakra was completely suppressed. The term he had used, final destination, wasn't giving her a very good feeling, but she couldn't go back to Konoha as she never had any real business being there in the first place and wasn't a citizen but a former ninja from another village. Her best option was to keep following Naruto, and her curiosity was already piqued over what had just happened. A few hours later, the battle ended inside the village and Jiraiya had managed to stop the snake summon as well as the rampaging Sand Jinchuriki. The first priority for the ninja was attending to the wounded, but Danzo had already returned to his route headquarters. He was greeted by several of his ninja reporting that the hideout had been infiltrated and many documents and scrolls had been looked through or stolen. The news was troubling as not only was he sure that it was the Jinchuriki that was behind it, but it meant that there had been a leak in information and the container was not only aware of him but his hideout and ninja as well. Even the Hokage didn't know about his operation or secret base, yet the container had managed to discover all of it without him knowing. Fu had tried to find any other trace of the container's chakra signature, but there was nothing within his range. He managed to pick up very faint traces in the Hokage Tower, the ninja library, and confirmed that the boy was inside their base, but no actual source of chakra was still in or around the village. "He's been rather busy. While we were investigating him, he was helping himself to information and techniques," thought Danzo as he sat at his desk in his room. The disappearing act was extremely troubling as he wasn't sure how the container had managed it. It's possible he has another hiding place and is just waiting for a good chance to leave, or he managed to leave the village without anyone noticing during a battle. Were his current thoughts on the matter? Looking through all that he knew, it seemed more likely that the container had already left. The boy was far more versatile and calculating than to stay in the village. He was now certain that the boy knew of the impending attack and had used everything to his advantage. There were only a few places that the Jinchuriki might go outside of the village. Wave Country was at the top of the list as the boy had already been there and had some kind of dealings with Gato before the man's death. A thought came to mind of what Fu and Sai had reported to him, that a ship had been hidden in Wave Country and ready to go at a moment's notice. It was never determined if the ship belonged to Gatu, and the container was definitely there loading it with supplies. So he may have had a ship prepared 2 months in advance. He thought and summoned a few of his ninja. He needed to intercept the Kyuubi Jinchuriki before he got away in that boat. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.